Hello.
Hello again. How are you?
Good. How are you? Long time no see.
I know, right? It was a great call yesterday. Awesome. So, wait for everyone to join us. Hello, Judy. How are you? I am just so confused as to why you didn't get the email last week because you were definitely checked.
Oh, I
Well,
didn't
I
get an email either.
didn't
Didn't-
either.
I sent
No.
it right after our class last week with the,
Oh, maybe I didn't look far enough back.
Yeah, maybe that's what happened to me too.
I
Because I
probably
was,
was too studious because I hadn't sent the earlier one. So, yeah. But did you get the one I just sent you, Judy?
I did. I
Okay.
did. And just as I pushed the send button on that email, my Outlook popped up my meeting appointment. And so I had it
Good.
twice.
Good. Hi, Carol. How are
good
you?
morning.
Hi, Lee. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Long time no see. I saw you last
Right.
night. Good. I hope you enjoyed the first session of Finding Your Voice.
I loved it.
Good.
I
I'm so
loved it.
glad. It's a good group. It's a big group and it's a good group. Really interesting people from like all over the place. So
Yeah,
very
I
interesting.
like the thematic things. I think it's just a really important course for me.
I'm so glad. That's really cool. All right. Well, hopefully we will see Lee Wen and Peta soon. Brenda can't make it today, so we will send her the recording. And it's our last day of this class, which is like amazing because it just went super fast. And it's the first time I've taught a class that's Zoom only that didn't have a wet ink component. So I don't know. How did you guys feel about that? You've done the others where, actually, Judy, I don't know if you have, but where you have both. So what do you think about it, just being Zoom only?
I've enjoyed
Like,
it.
Yeah?
I was actually thinking, I was on a walk right before this, and I was thinking that as much as I've liked the wet ink classes, this is a nice change in that I just have to like sort of show up and be present
Yeah.
and not have to do a whole pile of homework and critiquing other people's work, which
Yeah.
I've enjoyed in the other classes, but it's nice to have a little bit of a change of pace. So I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad. That's awesome. So, okay, great. So this week we're going to talk about dialogue. So that's both spoken and internal. And so we're going to jump into that. So I sent you guys three readings, and we have some others that I'm going to share a little bit today. So let's start with some of the information, and then looking at some examples, um, and then we can look at some of the readings and sort of talk about that as well. I will reserve some time at the end of class today for like wrap up questions and anything that you might be wondering. So, and feel free to jump in as we go along too. If there's something that's really pressing on you or that you've been thinking about since our last session, just jump in. Let me know. Okay, so dialogue, actually love writing dialogue because I feel like it can move the story along really well. It's such an easy way to show a character because of the way that they talk about something or the word choice or, you know, there's just so much possibility, and it also breaks up the page so it's not just so gray with text. It can add sort of a visual element that's a little bit different, and it keeps our attention. So some things to think about, like dialogue is great when it's not all dialogue. That would be a play, right? Or a screenplay or something. So the role of dialogue in prose, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is to bring a voice into the story and really have it be heard. And so the way that something is said, as well as what is said, is super important. Um, I I tend to really prefer to use the word said when I'm attributing dialogue. So she said, I said, he said, whatever it is. Um, Other people will choose different verbs, like, he whispered, she screamed, things like that. And those obviously are really vivid verbs that can completely change the tenor of the dialogue. And there's a place for those. And I definitely use those too. But I try most of the time to do said and let the words and the tone do the magic. And so it's really about understanding your character's nuances and how they would say some things. So actually, I'm going to totally revise what I said earlier and jump into one of the excerpts that I gave you because I think it's really interesting to see how it's handled. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at, of course, an Outlander excerpt. This is from book 9. And the reason I wanted to share this is because one of the things that Diana Gabaldon does with these characters, especially with Jamie, is she writes his dialogue very phonetically from the way that his Scottish accent would emphasize something, which is really hard to do and sometimes can be a little problematic. So, for example, I'm reading the last novel in the series by Sarah Donati, which is on the New York frontier in the 1800s. And one of the characters is an African-American woman who is actually in this book, she's like 90. But she has a way of saying things that some people might think would be rendered as racist today, you know, the way that she speaks. So we have to be careful when we're doing that. Now, to be fair, I think that in the Sarah Donati novel, she does those inflections with every single character. So like they're not all like one of the characters was educated in England. So she always is using these big words and trying to be very proper. But then there's a bunch of Quakers. And so they're saying thou and thee and friend this and friend that. And then she has other characters who are saying ain't, you know, because they grew up on the frontier. They didn't have a lot of education. And then there are Native American characters who have different ways about it too. So I think she's fair, but it is something to think about. So let's look at this excerpt. And I wonder if somebody would like to read a little bit for us.
I'll read.
Thank you.
He took a deep breath and his fists flexed briefly, then relaxed. No, forgiveness doesn't make things go away. Ye ken that as well as I do. He turned his head to look at me in curiosity. Don't ye? There were no more than a few inches between us, but the aching distance between our hearts reached miles. Jamie was silent for a long time. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. Listen, he said at last. I'm listening. He looked sideways at me and the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. He held out a broad, pitch-stained palm to me. Give me your hands while you do it, eh? Why? But I put my hands into his without hesitation and felt his grip close on them. His fingers were cold and I could see the hairs on his forearm ruffled with chill where he'd rolled up his sleeves to help Fanny with the gun. What hurts you? My heart, he said softly. Ye ken that, aye? Do you want me to keep going?
Do the next two and then I'll scroll up.
Okay. I do, I said just as softly. And you know it's true for me too, but I swallowed and bit my lip. It seems... Claire, he interrupted and looked at me straight. Are you relieved that he's dead?
Thank you. So who would like to take it up from here? Lee?
Yeah, I had a little problem looking at what was the last thing we did. I mean, is it well, yes, where I start?
Start with well, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, my
okay.
thing was here.
No,
This is Brianna. She will be probably making herself known
what are you
today
talking about?
and others.
What are you talking about?
My little black kitty.
Oh, okay, fine. All right. Because you know what? There's a character named Brianna in Outlander. So I'm like, where are you reading? So, okay. Just start with well, yes.
Yes. Well,
Okay.
yes, I said unhappily. I don't want to feel that way, though. It doesn't seem right. I meant I struggled to find some clear way to put it out. On the one hand, what he did to me wasn't mortal. I hated it, but it didn't physically hurt me. And he wasn't trying to hurt me or kill me. He just, I mean, if I had been Harley Boble ye met at Beardsley, you wouldn't have minded my killing him, he interrupted with a tinge of irony. I would have shot him myself on sight. I blew out a long, deep breath. But that's the other thing. There's the man, do you know his name, by the way? Yes, and you're not going to. So Dana asked me, he said tersely. I gave him a narrow look and he gave it right back. I flapped my hand, dismissing it for the moment. The other thing, I repeated firmly, is that I shot Bobo by myself. You wouldn't have had to. I would have felt that you were damaged by it. His face went black for a moment, then his gaze sharpened again. Sorry, it's just,
Okay.
You think it was damaged to kill, you think it damaged me to kill him? I reached for his hand and held it. I bloody know I did, I said quietly, and added in whisper, looking down at the scarred, powerful hand in mine. What hurts you cleaves my heart, Jamie.
Thank you. And then his fingers curled tight over mine. So what is the effect of this, you guys? We're looking at the dialogue mostly. I mean, there's other things to discuss here, but what is the effect of how she writes Jamie's dialogue in this?
Well, it really, I think it makes you understand him a lot more and who he is from this dialogue.
Mhm.
You feel what he's saying and you know what he's saying,
Mhm.
but by doing this, you know the character more.
Yeah.
It comes out, you know,
Yeah.
where they're from or whatever.
Yeah.
Just a deeper knowing with this dialogue.
Yeah. Who else? Anybody else have thoughts about this?
I
think
find it
it helps
distracting.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Go
I
ahead,
think
Judy.
it distinguishes between the two characters who's talking.
Yeah.
It helps me keep up with it.
Yep. Yep. Carol, what were you going to say?
I find it distracting.
Do you?
Yeah, because I'm trying to concentrate on what he's trying to say because I don't quite get it.
Okay.
And so then I end up slowing down so much that the temper of the story, I think, gets lost.
Well, I think if you were reading the novel, after
Yeah.
the first few pages, you'd get used to it. But yeah, I get what you're saying. It's a jolt because it's like, you can, like, you have to get used to that. So I think after a while, it just gets into a flow. But yeah, it's jolting at first for sure. Anybody else?
I think that the dialogue between them gives us a really clear sense of what they feel for each other and the tension that is currently in the air, but that there's still that love and respect anyway.
How do you think she does that? Like how they're just having a conversation. So how does she do that?
Well, it's things like he asked for her hand and she didn't want to give it to him, but she did anyway. The talking about each of them talking about the other being in pain, cleaving their own heart. I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but things like that. The aching distance between our hearts reached miles. Like that line was really like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think because and there's not, I mean, okay, I guess what I'm trying to ask is how is the dialogue showing? Because there's a lot of adverbs in this, by the way. I don't know if you noticed them, but I noticed all of them. And she's one of my favorite writers. So, you know, I'm forgiving to a degree, but I noticed a lot of adverbs. But also there's not really any action. They're sitting and talking. So how does this dialogue become showing then?
I think it's the descriptions outside of the actual conversation where she's describing and setting things up. I think that is a big part of it.
Yeah. My heart beating in my ears. He looked sideways at me. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. A broad pitch-stained palm. I mean, there's some beautiful alliteration in there. The hands are a big thing. Like I think Allison said. Is that Allison who said it? But you know, that's a huge part of the conversation. But even like, and I think some of the adverbs are okay. Like he said softly, what hurts you cleaves my heart, he said softly. There needs to be a tenderness to a line like that, you know? So if he just said it, it could be up to my imagination. Is he saying it emphatically? Is he saying it loud? Is he, you know, rushing through it? And then, you know, she's just as softly and, you know, I swallowed and bit my lip. So there are little descriptions that are very active, but mostly it's a conversation, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Hi, welcome to Peta and Lee Wen. Nice to see you both. We are just jumping into dialogue today. And you can watch the recording if you want to see the few minutes that you missed. So, all right, so there's a couple of things to think about when you're writing dialogue. So dialogue should be used sparingly and when it's the best way to move the story along. But you want to be aware of info dumps in dialogue because that's something that can happen too. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One is the as you know, Bob type of conversation, which is like, as you know, I went here and there and this is what happened and blah, 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 which is like just for the purpose of the reader, not to move the story along. So if Bob already knows, then this character doesn't have to say it, as you know, Bob, you know. So it's really, if both characters already know the information, it does not need to be explained in detail in dialogue because they both know the information. So I'm going to give you an example. I'll share my screen so you can look at it while I'm reading it. So I'm here at the examples here under info dumps. So the first one is, what if we use the same trick you did for Miss Klein's math final freshman year? Remember, where you wrote the answers on a sheet of paper, stuck to the bottom of your shoe, and held it up for everyone in the room to see? So like, they remember that. Like, you remember doing that. You don't have to say it in that detail. So the second example I think is better. What if we try the trick we used on Ms. Klein? She scoffed. Right, like sticking answers to the bottom of my shoe is going to work twice. That gets it all across really well, and we start to see a little personality in the dialogue without having to say, as you know, blah, 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 this is what you did. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So, you know, ultimately, anything that you write in your prose needs to be there. And if it doesn't need to be there, it should be eliminated. And there's no difference with dialogue. I mean, it's just the same thing. So think back to the character's goal. So as we've talked about before, if there's a goal for the character through the story, then everything that you do, whether it's dialogue or description or action, should be moving us closer to that goal. And so dialogue is a back and forth between characters. It should move us forward. It can be confrontation. It can be reaction. It can be relationship building. But again, we want it to move the story along, and it needs to be essential to that story progress. Now, the other thing is that it's important as the author to know your characters and know their purposes. Like, what is their role in the story, and how does their presence move it forward? So every character, like every person, sees the world differently. And that's going to affect what they say and what they do and how they say it as well. So when you know your characters really well and you know their pivotal role in the story, you can make their dialogue specific and individual. So what are some reasons that we use dialogue in prose? Well, as I said, it moves the story forward. It can reveal character traits. It can set the story tone. You know, if it's sarcastic, if it's, poetic, if it's lofty, if it's, argumentative, that really sets a tone for the story. As I said, it develops or reveals relationships, but it also can create or relieve tension and amp up conflict. And then again, on the page, dialogue can really adjust pacing. So if you've been sort of leisurely describing all the scene and you want to speed it up, dialogue is a great way to do it. Likewise, if it's been really fast-paced, dialogue can slow it down. So it's a great tool to help you with so many elements of your writing. Now, voice comes into dialogue too. And for those of you who've taken my Finding Your Voice course, there's your voice, and there's the voice of your characters and the voice of your story. Now, voice is the heart and soul of writing. So it's the artistic, creative part that only comes from you and how you work with the page. And so it's important to have a consistent voice. It's important to keep the same voice alive throughout the piece. So what determines your unique voice? It's how you look at the story, the details you choose to share, any research you've done, all of that impacts the voice. Your voice defines your characters' voices. So what you know, what types of people you know or you want to create, it's going to be in their voices too. But you want to think about your characters before this is like sort of leads you up to writing dialogue and frankly, anything. Who are your characters? Like sometimes it's a worthwhile exercise to, even in nonfiction, to really examine, like, what are my characters? What was their upbringing? What were their experiences early in life? What type of work do they do or did they do? And how do these things impact, their voice and the dialogue that's going to come forward? So how will they react to a situation you put them in the story? So for example, I mentioned The Endless Forest that I'm reading by Sarah Donati. And like I said, one of the main characters is Elizabeth, who was raised in England. Her mother was a Quaker. Her father went off to America and established a town in the New York frontier in the mountains. And she was raised in England. and she was very prim and proper, very well educated, and her purpose in coming to America was to be a school teacher, and she figured she would be a spinster, she would never get married. That all changes in the first book, and of course she falls in love, and everything is about the family that they create for the next 5 books. But those details are super important. And the truth is that I'm in book 5, and it's nowhere has it been mentioned that she used to teach or that she was any of her background, but it all informs her character and how she speaks. And so there's a conflict that happens, and everybody's like, really tense about it. And one of the daughters explains how when her mother gets stressed, basically, bigger words come out. And so this daughter is 10 years old, and she's like collecting a dictionary of new words that she can use because of her mother's reaction to this flood that happened in the town. But that is really important because I know, because I read all the books, her background as a person, as a character, which explains that. And so it's really consistent for the writer to see that through, Any questions about that? Anything? Okay. So then what is tone? So there's voice and there's tone. All that goes into dialogue, it's inflection, it's how things are said. So it could be like Jamie having a Scottish accent, being sarcastic, the way words are pronounced. Tone can be ironic, it can be matter of fact, it can be snarky. So thinking about how they're saying it and how do you convey that is really important. Being disrespectful, being serious. So tone mirrors emotions. So understanding the emotions behind the conversation can help you to fuel that dialogue and set a tone that is realistic and believable. Now, keep in mind that no one's going to tell a story like you do, and that writing is a very personal journey, even if you're making stuff up in fiction. And so what you need to do is to be true to yourself and listen to the pace and the flow and the rhythm of language and make sure that it resonates with you, because that's going to be one of your signature elements in your writing. And so how the voices come together really comes out of how you like to engage with those characters. So yes, they stand alone and they inform you what they're going to be like, but you're the puppet master. And so you just want to remember that. So there's dialogue between two characters, and then there's inner dialogue or inner monologue, where characters have a silent solo conversation. And this happens a ton. Sometimes it can happen too much, and so that's something you want to be aware of. Like, are you doing this because you're trying to clue the reader in, and it's maybe not necessary for the story? So you really have to examine in the role of inner dialogue, like, why am I doing this here? Is there another way that this information can be communicated other than being in someone's head? Because if you're in someone's head for too long, it can get boring. And so we want to just be aware. And if you have a single narrator going through your piece, there's going to be inner dialogue, but it shouldn't be all the time. It should feel like we're eavesdropping on a character's private thoughts, like we're really in their head. And it's when they're at their most honest. So it reveals a lot about them. It should be in their style and tone and voice, the way that they would speak. And so how they would talk to themselves, any self-doubt, anything like that needs to come through. So you want to show the reader important elements of your main point of view character that can add humor. It can sprinkle in backstory. It shouldn't info dump. And so there's a couple kinds of self-talk that come up in inner dialogue. There's constructive and destructive. So destructive self-talk is when the character's criticizing themselves, second-guessing, lots of self-doubt. But constructive self-talk is when they're like sort of cheering themselves on, little pep talks, or actively problem solving. And so you want to use their self-talk either way to show what's going on with them and advance the story. So always ask, is this inner monologue advancing the story? That's really, really important. Only share thoughts that are going to advance the plot. We don't hear every passing thought that rambles through your character's head, only the important ones. So I'm going to show you an example of hold on, where is it? Okay, let me share the screen. Okay, can you guys see this where it says example? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, would somebody read the first?
Bigger?
I can try. Sure.
Thank you.
Here, is that good?
Oh, yeah, that's
Good.
good.
Okay.
Yeah, much better.
All right.
Thank you.
Can somebody read the first example for me?
Saturday night came
Irene.
and still Sheila didn't call. Marco sat at the window, drumming his fingers on the gritty sill. I should hold up that liquor store tonight. I really should. Be something to do anyway. I have my knife.
Okay, so what do we know about this character from the inner dialogue?
Bored,
Mhm.
sinister.
And yearning. I mean, he's waiting for Sheila to call, right? Drumming his fingers. Like that call must be important, right? Okay, how about the second example?
Yeah,
Who-
Is sorry, just going on that. Is it anxiety? Sometimes in you're anxious, you're waiting for something, so
Yeah,
restless, and in that you want to do something rash.
sure, absolutely. Leewan, did you want to read the second example?
I think the last. Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. What were you gonna say?
Somehow, somewhere between. I
I'm
want to
sorry,
say
what-
that, he said, I have my knife.
Yeah,
I'm breaking up.
yeah, you were a little
This is,
bit.
I guess my system. It's good now.
Yeah. So what's your
Okay.
question?
I just stopped. I have my knife. I think it says something about this personality, this person, what's he going to do?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
how.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, let me read.
Okay.
If it's not clear, you can stop me. Somehow the system doesn't work well.
Okay.
Somehow, somewhere between slipping into my velvety fawn heels and the graceful, airy burgundy gown I was wearing, my head had started spinning questions, important ones. Will I be able to find Aaron in the crowd? And also, will he be okay? Will he get to the venue and find his seat? And the star of the show, maybe I won't see him until after the ceremony. What if I cannot find him?
Thank you. What about this one? So it's treated differently, by the way. The first example has italics where he's thinking to himself. This one doesn't. It's a choice. There's not a right or wrong. I like italics when it's self-talk, just because it's a device, and I think it breaks it up and you really know that they're talking to themselves, but doesn't always work that way. So any thoughts about this example?
She's a worrywart.
She really wants to get across she really wants to meet Aaron because it's important to her.
Sure.
So she's very, yeah, she's just anxious that maybe she may not find him, and if she doesn't, what can I do, kind of thing.
Right.
I think it's interesting the way in this example, you're not just hearing her specific thoughts, but you're hearing her descriptions of the things that she's putting on and the way that she's putting them on.
Yeah.
And normally we don't think like that when we're thinking to ourselves. I don't think, oh, I'm going to slip on these leather sandals that are so soft from being worn for so long,
Yeah.
But it's interesting how the author did that, and it works. And that's just a style of writing. And that's the kind of thing that I get confused about, how to sometimes convey thoughts with information and still make it feel natural and smooth.
Well, that's where consistency comes in. And so when you're writing and you're really focused on a work, you want it to be consistent all the way through. So the way you approach the matter, the way you build the characters, the way you develop them and let them blossom, you want that to be consistent. So I think I've told you guys about the novel that I'm writing, and I started it 10 years ago and just put it aside. So I had like 50 pages written, and I came back to it this year and said, oh, I really like the premise, so I'm gonna jump in. So I wrote like another 250 pages, and it was like two different writers. So when I went back to edit, those first 50 pages were like, I hated them. I really hated them. I'm like, who wrote this, And so I had to go back and make sure it was consistent all the way through, because I was a different writer 10 years ago. So that's up to you to go through. And frankly, any piece you write, whether it's 1,000 words or 100,000 words, you're going to write your draft, and then you're going to go back through it, and you're going to notice all kinds of mucky stuff when you go through it, and you're going to have to edit and be patient to make sure that you build the consistency in, and then you're going to have somebody else take a look too. So anything worth writing is worth the time it takes to do it right, which is really hard for me to say because I am the most impatient person in the world.
Question, Lynne,
Yeah.
for the second.
Yeah. Oh, Lee, when did we lose you?
Oh,
Did we lose you?
the second example. Oh, my internet is so bad. Do you hear me now?
Going in and out a
Stop the
lot.
video, maybe. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
So the second example, it seems the writer wrote down exactly what's in her mind. You can burn every step, or she's talking to somebody. Is it necessary you write down everything?
It's a choice. I think I would have edited that. That comes from a book called The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. And that's her choice. But like, I don't think she needed to say important ones, for example, because she says, my head had started spinning questions, important ones. And then she like lists a litany of questions. They're not all important. And I think I've told you guys about the rule of threes. After more than 3 things in a list, the reader starts to lose focus. And so when you have, how many questions are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a lot. It's a lot to keep track of. So I don't think it's a great example. It's just another example of internal talk, but I think it could have been done better. Yeah.
I didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. I didn't particularly care for it either, but what I took away from her, the words important ones, was almost like a defensiveness in the character. Like maybe she knows that somebody else wouldn't think that they were important questions, but to her they were. Sure. That was kind of what I took from that being included there. Yeah. But I agree that I didn't really like the way that was written. It doesn't make me want to read the book. Right. No, exactly. I want to share one more, and apologies for it being another Outlander example, but this is an interesting excerpt. There's a scene in the first book where Jamie actually gives Claire a beating it's a whole long thing, and I won't go into it because I don't want to ruin it for you guys. It's kind of a pivotal moment. But what is interesting, and it's sort of an explanation in the top in parentheses, the reason I want to share these 2 paragraphs, this excerpt, is that there's some internal dialogue that Claire has in the first paragraph, and then there's some dialogue from Jamie in the second. So it's her processing, and that's one of the roles of that internal dialogue. And so I just thought we could read it and talk about it. So would somebody like to, it's just these paragraphs starting with "as we walked." So would somebody like to read the 2?
I'll read if no one does.
Peter, did you want to?
Read too.
As we walked, considering the stories he had told me, I couldn't help but admire the job he had done. Without one word of direct explanation or apology, he had given me the message he intended. I gave you justice, it said, as I was taught it, and I gave you mercy too, as far as I could. While I could not spare you pain and humiliation, I make you a gift of my own pains and humiliations, that yours might be easier to bear. I've not told anyone about it, he said abruptly, but I thought that now you should know about Randall. I mean, you've a right to know what it is that lies between him and me. What it is that lies between him and me. The life of a good man, the honor of a girl, and an indecent lust that found its vent in blood and fear. And I supposed with a lurch of the stomach that there was now one more item weighting the scales, me. For the first time, I began to realize what Jamie had felt, crouching in the window of Randall's room with an empty gun in his hand, and I began to forgive him for what he had done to me.
Thank you. So what do you think about this? I mean, you don't know the incident, but how does that internal dialogue, what does it do? How does it develop the story?
She's trying to justify what he did to her, the beating, in her own head with whatever information he's given her, and what she, kind of reading between the lines and sort of trying to empathize.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's in line with the story and all. I haven't read this, but it seems to me that, she's trying hard to forgive him for what he did to her and finding any excuse she can to justify his action, that it was okay.
Yeah.
But
Now,
we're not very sure about that.
Right. Now, if you read it or you see the show, believe me, she's not so forgiving. So just don't think that the book is condoning spousal abuse or whatever, although there's a lot of violence in Outlander. But I think these two paragraphs are really artfully done because it's a mix of that internal processing, really powerfully, very, very dense, frankly, and a teeny snippet of his voice, but mostly it's internal dialogue. It's an interesting juxtaposition. And I think that she does it well. Any other thoughts about it? Anybody disagree?
I have read this book, and what I kind of get from this is in part, that Claire comes from a different world,
Mhm.
and what's acceptable in her world is different than what's acceptable and normal practice in Jamie's world.
Mhm.
And that's by reading her processing of it,
Mhm.
she's finding a way to sort of not justify it, but just process it in her own mind, that she's in a different world and that it means something different to him, which doesn't make it okay. But yeah, I thought that in the bigger context of the book, like I thought this was really good because you do get that she doesn't easily forgive him, and don't you ever do that again kind of thing. But I like the processing of her book, of her thoughts, so that you don't take away that this is a woman who just sits back demurely in the corner like, oh, oops, I've been scolded, I won't do that again.
Right. So what's interesting too is that, she comes from she goes back in time in 1946, at which time, I mean, husbands beat wives, it may not have been as prevalent as maybe the 1700s, but it still happened, and I mean, and then so that book was written in the 1980s. So I do think that there was some influence on the writer's time writing about these historical characters, and I do think she made Claire very liberated for the 40s, to be honest. I don't know if you think that, Allison, and if any of you read it and you have an opinion, let me know. But it's nuanced, it's very subtle, so I don't think it's a critique of the book, but I think in something like this, maybe. I don't know what you think.
I agree. She definitely, in the parts where she is in her present time of the 40s, there's a part of me that's like, I really don't think very many women would have been able to like live their life the way that she lives her life. And
Yes.
I don't want to say get away with, but but that said, it doesn't feel unreal. It feels like part of what makes her this unique, strong woman who is able to cope with the situation that she ends up getting thrown into, and that the people who love her, love that about her, and because of that about her.
Yeah, and I think that that's really well said, and I think that that's something to think about with anything you're writing, is that you can make a character that might on its face be unbelievable, but if you build up enough background that's convincing, you can get away with it. So if we're writing true stories, obviously we have to deal with what we have, but if we're writing fiction or we're even memoir is like what we remember and then we fill in where we don't. The thing to think about is, have I built up enough of a foundation to pull this off? And so the same thing goes with dialogue. Like, that's just about knowing your characters really well and knowing the situation so that it all feels like it's unfolding in a believable fashion and the reader can buy into it. People write fantasy, they write science fiction. It's totally a different kind of world. And we go with it because they have that foundation that makes the writing vivid, and we're on for the ride, you know. Any questions? Yes, Lee Wen.
Yeah, and also the first paragraph, the inner dialogue paragraph, I think, she wrote in a way, she didn't say I thought, I imagined,
Yep.
like, but she's considering
Yep.
it cannot help. I forgot.
Yeah.
She used the words that just so naturally, or not. Oh yeah, it's just that considering the stories, I couldn't help but admire.
Yep.
Without one word, she basically just tells everything, but not saying, "Oh, that's how I imagined." But she's just talking it. It's inner dialogue. So I found this is amazing, the way she just carried the whole thing through.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is that if you haven't,
they said, I gave you justice, it said, as I taught it. This is her talking, right?
This is her internal dialogue. So she's saying without
conversation.
Well, then he speaks a little bit later, but without one word of direct explanation or apology, he had given me the message he intended. I gave you justice, it said, it being the message from the previous sentence. So I gave you justice, it said, as I was taught it. So she's talking about what the message is. But you're right in saying that she never said, I thought, it occurred to me, like, because you guys, when you have internal dialogue, it just pops in your head. And that's what your character needs to do, because, that's one of the things we realize in showing rather than telling, is that all these extra words that we're building into our writing, automatically, it happens to all of us, they're not needed, because if we're doing our job and our reader is in the character's head the way we've intended, we don't need to say, I thought, or I thought to myself. Like, that's the worst. I thought to myself. Well, who else would you be thinking to? It's you never need to myself. But I think that's the goal, is to make it so, is to write something that the reader is so fully immersed in that they don't realize they're not in the character's head. So that's why we can get rid of I thought, because they're just in the act of thinking. Now, your first drafts are going to say I thought, and they may even say I thought to myself. And that's okay, because that's what first drafts are for. So again, I don't want you to leave this class and be like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to show rather than tell because it's so difficult. No. This is all in the 80% of your time spent writing, which is the making it pretty and cleaning it up. First drafts are messy for everybody. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So a couple things I want to just give you some thoughts, and then maybe we'll go to one of the other readings and maybe do a little writing. So there are some benefits to internal dialogue. Of course, if it's too much, you've got to really watch out for that, because a lot of us do it where it's like pages and pages have passed and it's just this character talking to themselves. But internal dialogue establishes a character's unique voice. That's a great thing. It also shows a part of them that they don't show to the world, because all the things we think to ourselves, we may not voice. And so you're getting like hidden secrets of the character. So it's a really, really nice tool. It also can sort of show a little bit of tension between what a character thinks versus what they say or do, which can add some tragedy or comedy to the story, because like, I wish I could do this, but instead I do that. Like, it really, really shows the reality of their humanity. It can show growth and development over time as they process things. It can also show them sort of coming apart, especially if you want your character to like implode in some way. It's through that internal dialogue that you can start to seed that. It can develop. Yeah, Judy.
I have, this reminds me of something that I'm having to deal with right now. So I find that in my writing, I have a tendency to pop in and out of the two characters' minds and all the time. And I'm repeating information from each person's point of view, but it's repeating the same information often. And I don't know how acceptable that is. I've not really noticed or paid attention in other readings before if that's a no-no that we're not supposed to do, or is it acceptable to give the same information from a different person's point of view?
Okay, well, let me ask you some questions. So why do you need to repeat the same information from different points of view? How does it move the story along?
I can't give you an example at the moment.
Okay.
It's just the way it's coming out. It's just the way it is.
So I would go back through it and I would ask yourself why. Like, look at it from an objective perspective and say, is this necessary? Does the reader need this? Like, is it integral to the story that the same information come up several times? Is it? And if
So oftentimes she's looking at something with a point of view of the way she sees this guy, and he, in his mind, is looking at the same thing from his point of view and saying, but this is the reason I do these things, or this is what I did. So he has a more negative idea of something, whereas when she sees it in a different type of light. And so it kind of takes the roughness off of his realistic idea of how he is or something. I don't know how to explain.
yeah, no, I mean, and frankly, it might work, Judy. I mean, I'd have to see it to know, but it could be a technique. Like there's I don't think this was based on a book, but there's a TV show called The Affair that ran on Showtime. It's fantastic. I think it was 4 or 5 seasons. But anyway, the brilliance of it is that each episode has 2 parts and it's the same events happening, but one half of the episode, it's through this character's eyes, and then the other half, it's through the other character's eyes. And it'll say, like, Joe, Susie, so that you see, like, oh, okay. And it's funny because when I first watched it, I watched it on an airplane, and then I ended up ordering Showtime to see the whole thing. So you get like 4 episodes on an airplane. But at first I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I didn't understand it. And then when I got it, I'm like, this is brilliant. And what you end up seeing is like the same room looks different. Like when Joe is telling it, it's like there's no hat on the coat rack. There's no flowers by the door. But when Susie's telling it, it's like colorful. It's like they're in the same room. But and what it says is we all see things really differently. And it was brilliant. So you could do that in a book, if that's your technique. It's just that you want to do it for a reason. And because that show was about an affair and how it impacted relationships over like years, it was so cool. It was a great, great technique, but, and it was totally unconventional. So I don't know any other show that's done that. I think a book could do it even better, to be honest. And so that way you're revisiting the same happenings, but all of a sudden it's unfolding in a different way and there's different meaning attached to it. So I think that the answer, Judy, is that there is no answer, because I'd have to see how you're doing it and see if it's working. And if there's a really good reason to have that same information repeated, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I think if you can go back with objective eyes and really look at it and consider, then I think you'll have your answer.
Okay.
Can I make a quick comment before we move on from that topic?
Sure.
I don't remember what the book was or what the context was because it was years ago, but I do remember reading something that was a multiple point of view, and it went over the same scene or series of events from each character's point of view. And kind of like you said with, one character notices the hat and the other doesn't.
Yeah.
And you get a different layer of information from each character because they each saw it differently or came into the event with different knowledge like beforehand, and so they interpreted it differently. And I thought like the way it all weaved together, like you get to the next person's POV and you learn something that you didn't know 3 POVs ago, and it's like, oh, and it makes everything take on a whole different meaning. So I thought that was a really clever way to write, but I imagine it's got to be done really carefully and really know each character really well and be able to make it work. But
I've actually read a lot of books like that where the same things are happening, but there's like 2 or 4 characters and the chapters go back and forth between them. And you're absolutely right, Allison. You have to know the character really well. And that way, internal dialogue is huge because they're each processing the same turn of events from their own perspective, their own experiences, their own goals. Like they want this out of the situation, so they see it in that way, or they have an opinion about it because of how it's going to affect them versus the other person. So it can totally work. It has to really, you have to examine it with objective eyes, ultimately.
Sorry, adding on to that, same thing. There's this book called Fleshman. Fleshman is in Trouble.
Okay.
So it's about a divorce. And the first half of the book is the guy's point of view. And again, the same events. Again, the second half of the book is her point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the same setting and all. So I do not know if, because I'm in a similar situation as Jody is in my characters. In the middle, I got confused on who's talking about what.
Sure.
So, I do not know if it's wise to then split it into chapters where you're going with one person's point of view for a bit, and then you jump into in the next chapter or in another section, jump into the other person's point of view. Because, for example, in this book, you really paint a negative picture of the wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she starts talking about the exact same events, and so she just, you tend to see that, okay, she's not a saint, but she's not purely evil either. It was, if there were other things that were playing into this. So
yeah. I think that if you have different points of view and different characters revisiting the same situation, it's best if it's broken up into chapters, just because it's very clear instructions for your reader. Here's where we're going now. Here's who's speaking now. It's easier to keep track of. I think that when you have a consistent narrator, just one narrator through the whole thing, you may not need chapters as much, although they still will do that, just to break it up so that you can have like a nice landing spot and a place to start again. But when you have different characters, the only way to do it is to separate with chapters and to make it very clear who's speaking. So the beginning of the chapter says, Susie, Joe, whatever. Okay, cool. So there are some problems with inner monologue or dialogue. Like I said, it can go on too long where you're just like in the person's head all the time. Definitely something to watch for. But also a character's inner voice can be really sarcastic and it gets really annoying. So do they really talk like that all the time? Like start to pay attention to your own inner dialogue, as you're driving in traffic or you're like, thinking about a situation, like how do you talk to yourself? Like when you pay attention to your own inner dialogue, it'll help you with your characters. Sometimes we don't even realize, we just have a feeling and we're processing something, but it's not articulated into words. So how would we convey that on the page? That's something to think about too. So I would invite you guys to spend like the next week looking for your internal dialogue and how does it happen? When does it happen? Is it full sentences? Is it like, are you waiting in the checkout at the grocery and you're like, oh my God, this is taking so long. This person is, who gets 12 packs of yogurt, or I don't know, like, are you doing that? Or are you like just scrolling your phone? Like, I don't know, like pay attention because so much happens beneath the surface, which makes your stories come alive, but we don't pay attention to it all the time. So that's something to think about. Also, one problem with internal dialogue is head hopping when you go from one character's mind to the next and it's really hard to do that without losing your reader's focus. So it's best when you can reserve internal dialogue for a very few characters. So many writers are successful with internal dialogue for one character, the protagonist, maybe two, but like back to Outlander, it's only first person when Claire speaks. There are chapters in later books where Jamie speaks, but it's always third person where he and like even if he's having internal dialogue, Jamie thought, it's not I thought. So of course she doesn't do I thought, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's just Claire's the only one with I. So there's a way to distinguish so that the reader is trained to understand what you're doing. I mentioned I thought to myself, no. Who else do you think to but yourself. So that's a red flag phrase. Just share the thoughts, jump right into the internal chatter. Telling huge chunks of backstory by having a character think about it or remember it, that's something to watch for too. There's got to be a better way to weave in the backstory. And as always, this is with everything. When you put in something in internal dialogue that doesn't serve the story, like if your character is like debating which brand of bleach to buy in the store, if that bleach is not important to the story goals, why? Does it matter what brand? Like, just buy the damn bleach, I grabbed a bottle of bleach and I'm done. And, so make sure everything you include is essential to the story. When I went back to edit my novel, I was at like 315 pages and I'm at 255 now. Now I'm going to be building in some other things that I think need to be developed, but tightening is a strength. It's a superpower. So that's really something to pay attention to. Any questions? Anybody? Okay.
So, yes, I just, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I had to shut down the video because my internet's working well today. I feel I like inner monologue. I think it's lots of time. It's just it's very honest. Really, you want to know what this person really thinking.
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really honest and truthful.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true, and I think those are some of the best places that we can reveal our characters' true nature. And so it's a great tool. It's a great tool.
It's lots of time is vulnerability, right? It's like your struggle, your anxiety, you're fighting for something, yes or no. You are internally not sure what to do, that kind of thing. All right.
Yeah.
That's
so
my comment.
The thing to think about is when you're doing this internal dialogue, because it is so revealing and so vulnerable, is to pair it with some of the physical sensations. So like when you're nervous about something or anxious, where do you feel it in your body? Some common things would be like in the stomach, clenching or tossing or, tumbling, I don't know, or in the throat, like the throat, my throat filled or it was hard to swallow or, things like that, or like the heart beating in your ears or in your temples. Those are, some of these sensations can be paired with inner dialogue to really underscore what it is that they're experiencing. And it gives a lot of information.
Yeah.
So would you guys like to try your hand at some dialogue today? Yeah? Okay.
I'm willing to.
Okay, good. Okay. I'm going to give you both writing exercises in the chat, and I'm going to ask you to choose one of them, and I'm going to give you 15 minutes to write, and save the other one that you don't do for like another exercise. But basically, I want you to think of someone you know, and it can either be someone you love or admire, or someone you really dislike. And I want you to think about writing a conversation between you and them. So, maybe it's one you've had, or maybe it's one you'd like to have. But I want you to show either the love or admiration in the dialogue, like in the back and forth, or show the dislike or the tension through the dialogue. It's a great exercise. And I think about when I used to coach my youngest son's soccer team. I coached him for 10 years from when he was 4 until 14. And early on, there was a mom on the team. The parents are always worse than the kids. The kids are awesome. And there was a mom who was like the bane of my existence. And I was like a younger mom, and I was just very like self-conscious about coaching soccer because I'm really not a soccer player. But they were little. And so the whole point was like, just run this way and like stop looking at the butterflies and try to connect with the ball. Like that was the point. And this mom would sit on the sidelines and she would yell at the team, and she would yell at me if I wasn't coaching the way she wanted. And it was like, and I hated her, literally hated her. And at a certain point, over the years, I got to know her, and I realized she had like deep insecurities, and that was fueling it. And all of a sudden I had this wave of compassion for her, and she no longer bothered me. But if I wrote this conversation with her, like what I wanted to say years earlier, it would be very different than what conversations I had with her later. So think about something like that. Like, what would I want to say? Of course, I never did. I always just was like, okay, but but let's do it. Let's write it. So I'm going to give you guys 15 minutes, and then I'd love to hear how it goes. Okay, cool. All righty, let's finish up, take about 30 seconds. All kinds of people home in my house today. Microwave beeping. My husband just almost came in to give me a kiss. I'm like, I'm on Zoom, I'm on Zoom. He works at home on Wednesdays. Okay, so tell me about it. How did it go?
It was really hard.
Yeah?
I did a conversation between myself and my daughter,
Okay.
and I don't know if it's because it was such a close relationship that I have a hard time separating the two voices.
Okay.
She has a very large vocabulary, and most of the time I have a hard time even understanding most of what she's talking about. So I was having a hard time even writing the way she would have talked
Okay.
because of her vocabulary and the things that we talk about. But
Do you want to share it?
oh, I guess I can try. But like I said, her vocabulary is a lot different than kind of what I've said here. So this would be a typical conversation we would have.
Okay.
Starting out with me. How was your day today? Fine. Only fine? No, shitty, but I was being positive. What's wrong? What's wrong? The coalition I'm heading had another meeting today to discuss teacher salaries and benefits, and no one knows what the, and she would have probably used a more colorful word, the hell they are talking about.
Uh-huh.
Well, it seems like you should ask someone else to take on more responsibilities. Yes, I realize that. I wasn't asking you to solve my problem for me. Just listen to it. Yeah, but if I can help, I want to. I already know I need more help. There just isn't anyone willing to do it. Well, maybe you need to stop trying to do it all yourself and let it fall apart, and then someone else would be forced to help more. I can't do that. Thousands of teachers are depending on me to make sure they get represented so they can get paid fairly. But if no one else cares enough to help, then what? I just let laws go into effect that will continue forcing teachers to work for slave wages. And this is a conversation that we have often.
Uh-huh.
And I really understand about this much of what she really does. It's the part that I understand.
So Judy, I want all of that in the internal dialogue. So like you could take this and you could expand it to like double its size with what you think as you're going through the conversation and what you imagine she thinks.
Oh, I didn't know you wanted me to.
No, you don't have to. I'm just saying think
Okay.
about what that would be, because I'm sure when you talk to her, I mean, I'm just guessing, but I'm sure you're like, what the hell are you talking about? What is that word? What, you know, or like maybe whatever she says, I don't know what word, but it's like, you know, interdisciplinary. What does that mean? Or you know what I'm saying? Like, I could see where you could sort of pack it in, and it would make both personalities. It already comes to life. Like we're laughing out loud here, but I bet you could even insert that in. Don't you think?
I'm sure. Yeah. It's a running joke in our family that she's been in this profession since her early 20s, and she's 32 now. And not one person in our family can ever answer the question when somebody asks us, what does your daughter do for a living? We cannot. And she has explained it to us over and over and over. And not one of us can explain to anybody exactly what her job title is or what she does for a living. We just know that she has something to do with passing laws and, and has something to do with early childhood development and education. And, that we just don't know.
I think it's awesome. You did a great job.
Okay.
You did a great job. Thank you for sharing it and for going first.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted to create a character like her, or if you wanted to write an essay about this, I would pay attention to when you guys talk and jot down some of the words, or like just, you know what I mean? Like it's a process, right? Basically what we're coming up with is writing is a process. And so you could jot all this down. I think you could write a great essay about like, I don't know what my daughter does, but I listen and I talk. I don't know what we're saying, but like it could be fun. So anyway, good job.
Thank you.
I'll go next.
Okay.
Judy really enjoyed that. Okay, let's see. The dish was perfect. Al dente pasta, perfectly cooked shrimp oozing with butter and garlic. It was the best scampi I had ever made. I know they will love this, and then they'll love me. Michael, my oldest walked in. Yuck, I hate pasta. My mom would never cook it for us. Where's the cereal? Already felt defeated. I just want to do something better than Beth, their biological mom. Stephen, my youngest, walked in. What's that smell? He looked in the skillet. Yuck, I hate shrimp. Good God, I thought, can't I at least try it? Good God, can't they at least try it? I am so over trying to prove myself worthy of being their other mom. I took the skillet and dumped the contents into the sink. Yogurt and cereal will be their meals from now on.
Nice. There's a lot of emotions coming out of that. I love it. The internal dialogue and the snippets of dialogue. Really well done. Very cool. But I'm so sorry that you dumped the shrimp or whoever the character is. Like, come on. Shouldn't she
That
have
was
sit down?
me, and I
Yeah.
was like,
I'm like, sit down and eat it and be like, make yourselves dinner. You know?
Yeah, eat it. I would save it. I could understand the emotion. The children, it's like my I have a 13-year-old, so he doesn't like seafood. Whenever I cook seafood, he walk in, say, "Mom, what's the smell?" and took his food and went to the other room, not sit with me. So, and then he said, "Mom, buy the air fresher, whatever the perfume."
Yeah.
And he'd buy one. He just go around the room do that. But I think the more time I cook shrimp, he get used to the smell. He now just sit with me.
Yeah.
So
the thing for me was, this is really early when my husband and I were dating,
Uh-huh.
and he had 3 children,
Uh-huh.
2 of which ended up kind of living with us.
Uh-huh.
And so it was at the very beginning, and I just felt imperfect.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the dumping in was just like, yeah, I should have eaten it, but really where I was is
Sure.
over it.
No, I get it. And what a great topic for an essay, because so many people can relate. I bet you.
Thank you. I agree. I should have eaten the shrimp.
Yeah.
I write about it. Yeah.
For sure. That's really awesome. Who else would like to share how this went?
I'll have a read.
Okay.
Mine ended up being more inner dialogue than actual.
Okay.
Oh, geez. Has she seen me? The urge to duck back out the door was strong. My muscles tensed. Turn around or dash up the aisle, stay out of sight. Would that make me the stalker or the prey? Too late. That moment of indecision cost me. Hi, Sue. Holy fakeness. Did I sound as forced as it felt? Hi, Al. Her face lit up, the smile broad, eyes wide. She moved in for a hug. Surrendering to her enthusiasm, I tentatively patted her bony shoulder blades and tried not to inhale the musty scent of her strange and ancient cardigan. School your face, girl, school your face. Pulling back, I forced warmth into my expression, softened my eyes, widened my smile. Somewhere in there is the person I once got up to mischief with, laughed with, before the mystery diagnosis she wouldn't share, before the drugs, prescribed and otherwise. How are you? How have you been? What are you up to? How's Hans? Have you seen Jane? I heard she's here. We have to do lunch. I waited. Her eyes drifted over me, taking in every detail. I imagine this is what a goldfish feels like on display, or maybe a lab rat is a better analogy. No point in jumping in. When she paused, her head tilted, eyes scrutinizing. Yeah, same old, same old. Hans is good. No, I haven't seen Jane. I actually didn't know she was here. A white lie. Her life is so small, a medicated haze. This grocery store outing will take something out of her for days. The lie feels like a kindness, but also selfish. I want to see Jane on my own, without the awkward, stilted conversation and long pauses that was lunch the 3 of us had together on her last visit.
Nice. Wow. There is so much in there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Holy fakeness. Love that. That is so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have about 7 minutes left, and I just want to give you guys an opportunity to ask whatever questions are popping up, anything related to writing, or whatever, just to close out the class in a way that makes sure that you feel complete, like you've gotten the whole package. So yeah, so I will say also that it's really weird because I always am saying, hey, I have other classes, sign up for my other classes, but I'm not teaching anything after this until September, I think, which is so weird but I'm so excited about. And I am going to be offering a second cohort of the writers community that starts August 1st. So anybody who wants to apply for that, let me know. And I allow 6 people in. We have 7 right now. I may make that concession for the second one if we have, because I think we have a lot of interest. So that's a 6-month commitment. If it's something that you want to have like a regular cohort, we meet weekly, and that's off of writing workshops. It's my own thing. And I also have some spots open for writing coaching clients that would begin. I could begin somebody in June, but then we take a July hiatus. So just know that. Otherwise, it would start in August. So if you want to continue with me, both of those are options that will be coming up. So now I open it to you. What questions do you have, and how can we finish off with a bang?
Really great class. Thank
so
you,
glad.
Lynne. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I was a little late. I don't know if you the one of the reading you give us, Montauk, is
From last week?
it's from last week, or it's for this class, or not the other class? This class, right? Montauk.
I think so, and I think it was last week, right? Right?
Oh yeah. Did we talk about it? Can we talk a little bit about? I just read a little bit. It's about the mother packing.
Yes, let me pull it up. It was from last week, and let me see. Okay, so anybody else have a question that they want me to answer quickly before we do that?
No, if anybody wants to talk about it, I don't have to. I mean, let people ask questions.
Sure. Well, what was your question about this?
I quickly read. I think it's really, really good because there's lots of like there are some dialogues. The dialogues is work in between, like a pause.
Yep.
And also I think the description. So lots of the inner dialogue and the action, the verbs you use here. So I just mentioned, I read it quickly. I really like it.
Yeah, I actually really love Coppernickel as a literary publication. They have some wonderful pieces. And I shared this for the concrete and specific detail lesson. But I do think that it just has a lot of great examples of showing rather than telling, bringing together everything that we've learned. So I think it's just a beautiful piece. And I also this is a piece that is short. So it's the separation between ideas is with these numbers, which is a convention that people use. I also really like the single sentence paragraphs, here. Like, I think it just sometimes it breaks up the text, but it also really makes a statement. And so when you see just a single line, you're like, okay, I need to pay attention to that. It needs to stand on its own. So there's some really cool techniques in this piece, I think.
Okay.
Any specific questions about it, or any parts that you wanted to highlight, Liwen?
No, I briefly read it. I think it's good. That's why I mentioned this.
Cool. Awesome. Other questions? Does anybody else want to finish with a question or comment or anything like that?
I don't have a
The
question.
thing that you mentioned about the cohort, sorry, Allison.
Judy and then Allison. Judy, what were you asking?
The thing that you were, the 2 things you were talking about, the cohort and something else, I really didn't understand what that was about.
Yeah, so the writers community is here, I'm going to put it in the chat and you can take a look. And it's basically a 6-month cohort of, and ignore when it says March and October, I'm offering a second round. So there's going to be one starting in August. But it's basically a community of writers that meet every week for a 1-hour call, and we do a half-hour of writing coaching and a half-hour of workshopping one person's writing. So you'll get your writing workshopped every 6 weeks, and you receive a monthly lesson and weekly writing prompts. So it motivates you to keep writing, but in a community of people that you really come to know and trust, and you get your work looked at, but it's at a reasonable pace. So a lot of people, when they do writing coaching with me, they either have 3 or 6 drafts of something that they send me every month. That's a lot. And some people just are like ready for that. But other people say, every few weeks, every month, I'd like to have some feedback on my work, and so this is a good option. So I just put that link in there. Allison's in the current cohort. I don't know if you want to just chime in about what you think about it, Allison, just to give Judy some thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I have loved it. I am loving it. We have developed a really nice relationship, a safe space. We've gotten to know a lot about each other through the sharing of both in conversation and the pieces that we've each shared. I've learned a lot about critiquing other people's work, and I've gotten a lot of benefit out of getting readers' feedback on pieces of my work. And Lynne's a phenomenal teacher, as you all know, because you're here. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend it for anyone looking for a consistent community of people that show up for each other.
I'm in. I just wanted to say that.
Cool.
Uh,
Excellent.
I'll get back with you, more details. I just didn't want to miss that opportunity.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Judy, I hope that answers it. I'm going to update the dates on there after our call. And if you're interested, just let me know. Okay. Allison, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna wrap up with a comment and just say thank you, and that I found this really, really valuable, and I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad. It was really a fun class to teach. I'm glad that you guys were in my trial run. So any feedback you have, please send it to me. Any testimonials you want to share, I will always take them. And if you'd like to work with me one-on-one, just let me know. Okay.
Thank you, Lynne. This is my third class with you.
I love it. I love it.
I'll see you
Awesome.
tomorrow.
Excellent. All right. See you, everybody.
Lynne,
Bye,
how long will the
everyone.
video stay
Bye,
on?
guys.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
I'm gonna miss you guys.
You too. Judy, they'll stay on my YouTube indefinitely. They're
Okay.
unlimited, so only you guys can see them.
Okay, good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye.